Welcome back to another wildcard video ahead of Double Gameweek 22. There are several changes from the last wildcard squad I've shown you. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. And there are more things to look out for this weekend with the FA Cup and also the second leg of the Carabao. So we've just seen Manchester United win 3-0 away to Nottingham Forest and also Newcastle getting an important victory away to Southampton. It looks like it will be a Newcastle versus Manchester United final. And if that's the case, then they will likely blank in 25. But there are other factors to consider, such as the FA Cup, and on Saturday that's the all-important one for Double Gameweek 22. And keep an eye out for Saturday. If Manchester United or Leeds draw and they don't get the win or loss, so to speak, then they could lose that double in 22. So all they need to do is win or lose the game. Otherwise, they run the risk of losing that double in 22. And Manchester United will be playing Reading at home, whilst Leeds will be away to Accrington Stanley. So very important cup ties. They're going to have a really big impact on how we're going to approach all of these game weeks, maybe even chips for some of us as well. So let me know your thoughts on this wildcard squad. If you end up enjoying this video, then be sure to drop it a like. Let's try to get this to over 300, and we're also looking to push on towards 18,000 subscribers and beyond. That'd be very much appreciated. And without further ado, let's get straight into this video. I've remained fairly consistent with goalkeepers since the restart. I tend to recommend either Kepa or Nick Pope, and whilst I also bring some other names into the hat like Raya and sometimes someone else like Edison, I really tend to focus on those two goalkeepers, Kepa or Nick Pope. And with Newcastle likely to blank in Game Week 25, or that possibility at least existing, I would just rather go for Kepa, who's cheaper, and he also won't be a headache going into the future as well. And he also has a lot of saves and bonus points potential, and whilst Nick Pope can get these really big returns as well, you're mainly looking at clean sheets with him, and to be fair, he's the highest scoring goalkeeper in the game, but also the most expensive. And I think Kepa is one of the very best goalkeepers pound for pound at this moment in time. So I'd go for these two goalkeepers. I know there is maybe a temptation to go for Edison with a double in 23 and a really good fixture in 25 against Bournemouth, but I'd still go for Kepa Arrizabalaga. And if you want to triple up in Man City, I'd go for the outfield players instead. The foundations for this backline have been set a long time ago. Now, Ben White has a few pros and cons for him. So he was subbed off very early against Manchester United at half-time. He was struggling against Rashford. He was on a yellow card. And Tomiyasu coming on for him was a fantastic substitution. But that doesn't mean Ben White will lose his spot or suddenly not be a good FPL option going into the future. He always has this risk about him. And he has been subbed off fairly early on quite a few occasions. Sometimes it can be before the 60th minute mark, so he doesn't bank the clean sheet. Sometimes it'll be just after, so he can bank the clean sheet. Then Arsenal concede, and actually Arsenal have conceded a lot of goals between the 61st and the 75th minute mark. So sometimes Ben White being subbed out early can play in your favour. He's cheap, but you might have value tied up in a Saliba or a Gabriel. So going for those options is completely fine, and there is no more risk of either of those players being suspended for the next game, because Arsenal played their 19th match. So the yellow cards reset from 5 yellow cards needed for suspension to 10. So don't worry about any of that. But I would go for an Arsenal defender, despite the temptation to maybe go for 2 or 3 attackers instead. Then we've gone for John Stones. I think he's a nailed-on Man City defender, and I say that loosely because you just never know with Pep Guardiola, and that's why I can understand why some of you may go for an Edison just to save yourself that headache. But if you wanted to go for a Man City defender, then I would go for John Stones, and like I said, I'd rather go for Kepa than Edison, and then go for a City defender instead. And I think John Stones could be the solution for you. Just bear in mind that Ruben Dias has been knocking on the door for some time now. He's been on the bench in the last few Premier League games, and we've seen with Ake, Akanji, no one is safe from Pep Roulette, even if they seem nailed at one point, and they might still start most games. There could be the odd match where they are on the bench, and that will be very frustrating for you. Luke Shaw's up next. There should be no concerns about rotation for him. He's got 2 fantastic home games in Game Week 22, provided that Man United and Leeds avoid a draw in the FA Cup. I think he's a very basic and simple option here on the wild card. He's someone that's been fantastic since the World Cup as well. He went back into his normal position on the left-hand side against Arsenal, and he has been doing that on a few occasions now. Lisandro Martinez is back in the side, and that pushes Luke Shaw into his favoured left-back position. But I have to say, Luke Shaw is doing an incredible job from an FPL perspective when playing as a left centre-back. The other 2 defenders, and this is where things could maybe be a bit complicated in the future, and that's why we have a lot of squad depth, is 2 Newcastle defenders, and it's going to be problematic in Game Week 25 if they do blank. The same goes for Man United and the likes of Luke Shaw, but you do have the squad depth to cover, and I wouldn't be in a rush or be completely settled or obsessed with having an 11 out in Game Week 25, but so long as you can get 8 or 9 players, cover the key options there, you should be fine. But you also don't want to be in a position where you're down to 6 or 7 players in Game Week 25 and then you want to use your free transfers or take hits to then build a respectable squad for Game Week 25 as well. But at the same time, you also want to be doing well before Game Week 25 and after. So it's kind of a difficult balance to achieve, but it is possible with this wildcard squad, and you've still got free transfers left heading into Game Week 25. And I think Newcastle can still keep plenty of clean sheets before blank Game Week 25 if Newcastle do indeed blank and reach the Carabao Cup final. It's very difficult to separate the three Arsenal midfielders, Martinelli, Saka and Odegaard, but I think there will be a gap that will start to form between Odegaard and Saka, with Martinelli, with Trossard knocking on the door, and he could take some key minutes away from Martinelli, especially if the Brazilian can't get his act together, because in recent games I think he's been fairly underwhelming and he definitely is much better than what he's showing. Odegaard is the best for me, he's the cheapest, and he also offers the most bonus points potential with 18 compared to Saka's 9. What Saka does have though is he's on penalties. He's obviously a very consistent player as well, but when you look at the amount of double-digit returns he's scored this season, well, not many. And you look at Odegaard, he's done it on multiple occasions, and he also does it against these teams like Everton that are sitting in the bottom half or in the bottom 3. So I think Odegaard would be my preference if I had to pick one right now. Having said that, I would love to have both, and maybe if you don't go for free Arsenal players in general in other positions, whether it's Ramsdale, White, Nketiah, then you could go for Saka and Odegaard quite easily, and I would have no issues with that whatsoever. They of course double in 23, and Arsenal are second in the fixture ticker over the next 6 game weeks, only behind Man United. And as you can see here, we've got Fernandes and Rashford, and you cover that double in 22. They offer the best captaincy options in that week should they double in 22, which we've discussed already, and they also have great long-term fixtures. Another game against Leeds in Game Week 23. There's a lot to like with these Manchester United assets. Bruno Fernandes has only blanked once since Game Week 16, whilst Rashford has scored 10 goals in all competitions since the World Cup, the only player in world football to achieve that. So he's been in absolutely fine form, and I think these Man United assets could offer really good value in the next few weeks. As for Riyad Mahrez, he's another midfielder I like a lot. I do prefer Bukayo Saka in isolation, but we have gone for a third Arsenal player in the forward position. And as for Mitoma, if you're looking for a cheap midfielder, I still like March, McAllister, Andres Pereira, but Mitoma does look like the best right now. Just bear in mind there is a chance that Brian will blank in Game Week 25 if Newcastle reach the Carabao Cup final, and if that's the case, you might just want to go for Andres Pereira and save yourself a headache. I would not make early transfers this week. I would wait as long as possible once the FA Cup and Carabao Cup matches are done, getting closer to the deadline of Game Week 22, and that's when I would start to finalise transfers. But Eddie Nketiah has gone up in price recently. I would also expect him to go up in price yet again. He's at 5.5% ownership, and that's going to only increase from now on. He has scored 30 points in his last 5 games with 4 goals, 5 bonus points, that clutch performance against Man United with the equaliser and the late winner. He also scored in the FA Cup, so that means he scored 5 goals in his last 6 appearances in all competitions. He's been in fine form. I don't think Jesus will be rushed back in. He's expected to return in around 4 or 5 weeks, but I think he'll be eased back into the side, and Nketiah in the meantime will continue to start games. He has a double in 23, and whilst I really like Ivan Toney, especially in Game Week 22 and also up until the end of the season, there's a few doubts about Brentford assets with a potential blank in 25 and also a tough game in 23 away to Arsenal. So I think Eddie Nketiah could be your solution. However, if you're not really feeling it or you just want to stick with Ivan Toney, that's completely fine. And you can just go for Toney and in the midfield go for Saka instead of Mahrez perhaps. Or another possibility would be Nonto instead of Nketiah and then go for Saka instead of Mitoma. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. The other 2 forwards are self-explanatory. Haaland and Harry Kane, 2 of the best FPL assets this season. They've been so consistent. Haaland is a must-have. Harry Kane, I would argue, is the second best premium in the game, and they are always going to feature at this point in the wildcard videos unless something drastically changes. With so many players offering great value, it can become difficult to order the bench and to also not have too much squad depth at this point. But I would go for Kepa Arrizabalaga in goal with Ward on the bench, a back 3 of Trippier, Botman and Luke Shaw, a midfield 4 of Rashford, Bruno Fernandes, Mitoma and Odegaard, and the front 3 of Eddie Nketiah, Harry Kane and Erling Haaland. Now, the bench itself is looking very strong. You've got Mahrez, Ben White and John Stones. You could easily bench boost this team at any point, and I think you could get a decent decent score. And the bench boost is a fairly overrated chip. I think 15 points, would be a pretty decent return. Anything more would be a bonus in my opinion. Now, the captaincy is the next big thing. I would go for a Man United midfielder should they double in 22, and it has to be between Rashford and Bruno Fernandes for me. It's a really close call, despite Rashford being the absolute informed player, but Bruno Fernandes has also been quietly consistent, going about his business, and I think he'll become more popular by the time we get to the Game Week 22 deadline. But I would favour Rashford at this moment in time, but as I said in my best free hit team video, if you are looking for a differential captain, then I think Bruno Fernandes could be your answer. I wouldn't expect his effective ownership to be that high, and if you were to put the armband on him, any return he does get would be absolutely massive. And if he can outperform Rashford, I think you could see yourself doing really well in Double Gameweek 22. So there's a very strong squad. I would not be comfortable benching Mahrez, Ben White or John Stones, especially Mahrez, but it is what it is. And if not, you can just go for some cheap options. Like I said, on the bench, you can maybe go for Andres Pereira instead of Mitoma. You can go for a Bueno instead of Stones. But I also would like and recommend this kind of squad depth because you've also got blank Game Week 25 to think about. And of course, there are still some things that are left unclear, and we're going to find out in the next few weeks and months. But thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, found it useful, then be sure to smash the like button and subscribe if you're new. Let's get this video to over 300 likes. Let's keep on pushing towards 18,000 subscribers. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM, and you can also become a patron or a channel member, patreon.com/DylanRCM. And if you sign up now, you can then be boosted up to an extra tier, and you will receive exclusive early access to videos and also access to all team reveals. So be sure to check that out. It'd be very much appreciated. I wish you all the best of luck for Double Gameweek 22. Enjoy the FA Cup and Carabao, and I'll see you next time.